This is the Everyday Essentials chef knife. Haven't sharpened it. Been using it as the only knife in the kitchen. It came with one of the higher sharpnesses I've seen on a production kitchen knife. Had a very thin edge, ground at a nice low angle. However, right now relatively low sharpness. I was a bit disappointed by how fast the sharpness degraded, considering the quality of the initial edge, until I looked at with a bit more care some of the cutting, and I think I know why. This knife is really flexible because it's so thin. And even when I'm cutting through these apples, I can feel the knife bending significantly. And of course, if the knife is bending, that means the edge is twisting and bending, and that's very hard on a knife. A knife is very strong resisting a force straight up and down. It's not very strong when it's twisting. And I think that's one of the reasons why the edge on this degrades so fast. So of course it's still capable of cutting up apples and stuff like that, but they're not very dependent on sharpness at all. And as a rather extreme example, that's the spine of the knife. Easily goes through an apple, just gets cut up on the skin. But stopping the edge retention trial now because it has no ability to cut up a tomato, and that's where I've stopped it so far. And it's long past the point where I would have stopped it normally. Like I would have sharpened the knife before now and not have it skid all over the place on a tomato, obviously. And because it's so thin, the force in general is relatively low. The other drawback, which I've noticed, is it has almost no curvature. It's almost completely flat to the cutting board. And that means once it loses that initial really high sharpness, you will notice on green onions and other type foods it's difficult to make the complete cut. And if you were paying really close attention, you'll see that sometimes when I attempted to cut the apple, it didn't cut all the way through the skin because, again, too much of the edge is contacting the cutting board and you don't get that high pressure that you need to make the cuts. And the funny thing was, I was even comparing this to Kylie's hatchet from CKC Knives. And the hatchet, of course, has a nice round curvature, and I was finding the hatchet was actually making the cuts through the materials, sometimes like green onions, much easier because it had a nice curve, whereas this is 100% flat and the only curve is right at the end. So this actually, I wouldn't really consider it a chef's knife, even though it's marketed as such. It's like in between a chef's knife and a sort of larger utility knife because it's not as broad as a normal chef's knife, and it doesn't have that sweeping curvature. There's a few things that I don't like about this. It's not sharpened all the way back to the heel. The heel actually had a little squarish bit here, which I ground off. I'll also grind this off 100% sharpened. The spine is broken. It could be rounded off a bit more, but because it's so thin, it does high pressure points really easy, so it's not that comfortable on a forward grip when you're pinching up on it, because a lot of pressure comes on that right there, and especially for heavy vegetables. And if you're trying to cut through stiff material, especially hard skinned materials like squash, it's not a good knife at all. You try to put pressure on it to force it through the rind, and the knife just wiggles back and forth, and it just is, not only does it not feel overly safe, you can tell it's really doing a number on the edge to be twisting back and forth like that. And like I said, at this time edge is gone.